Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at onpurposely.com.
We just looked at our situation, and Todd said to me, I'm not going to leave you. I haven't given up on us. And that was what began to turn everything around. That and recommitting to God, that we don't know how we're going to make it work. Our marriage is just in crisis. But God, please help us. We're recommitting. That was the first step.
I'm Julie Lyles Carr, and you're listening to the AllMomDoes Podcast, part of the Purposely Podcast Network. Get ready for some great inspiration for the life you're living, the kids you're raising, the marriage that you're nurturing, and the faith walk you're walking, right here on the AllMomDoes Podcast. I've got to tell you, marriage is wonderful and difficult and has seasons and has times that you think you have figured it all out and has times that you feel like you have no idea what you're doing. And then there is a situation that can sometimes arise that can leave you absolutely scratching your head and trying to figure out what you're going to do, because sometimes you may be one of the few couples you know going through this. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to have Kristin Faith Evans and Todd Evans on today. You guys, thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks for having us.
Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, before we jump into our topic today, which I think is going to be incredibly helpful to couples who are absolutely in the middle of this situation that we're going to talk about, and also for those who may be saying, how do I come alongside someone who's walking in this kind of life experience? I want to learn a little bit more about y'all. I mean, first of all, y'all have so many degrees and special letters behind your names. It reads like an amazing academic alphabet soup. So, Kristin, give me the FYI on your educational background and how you ended up in the line of work that you did.
All right. Well, to just go with the topic, we have so many degrees because we've had to pivot and change our our jobs and what we're doing just to try and make life work with our family. So we started out in ministry, and so Todd and I went to graduate school at Wheaton College and got our master's in Christian spiritual formation. We did ministry for almost a decade, had to leave ministry based on our family situation. I went back to school to get my master's in social work, because I realized I wanted to work with people in a more clinical mental health setting. So I'm a licensed master social worker.
All right. And then Todd, what about you? Because there are some other really impressive letters after your name.
Yes, ma'am. We, as she said, we had a lot of family issues. We had to kind of reevaluate our life and kind of look at things. And so after serving in ministry, like Kristin said, for about a decade, we realized just financially and emotionally and things, we just couldn't continue with that and had to kind of seek the Lord's guidance about where to go next. And doors opened for me to go back to graduate school and do my PhD there with the intention of having a more stable job, a little higher pay to pay for medical things and bills and things that came up with our family.
Absolutely. And so, listener, what we're talking about is when you have a marriage and you're trying to build and thrive in a marriage in which you have kids who are differently abled, kids with disabilities. And my listener knows that this is a path that my husband and I have walked with a child with significant hearing loss, and then another child who experienced a stroke at birth and as a result has cerebral palsy. Now, my husband and I always say to some degree, we're in more of the shallow end of the pool. And we feel really honored that we had a long season where we had a nonprofit where we brought dance opportunities and performance to individuals who are differently abled. One of my daughters actually was the director of that program. I can tell you, listener, and of course, this is something that Kristin and Todd know all too well, it can be a lonely terrain and it can be a real strain on a marriage when, as much as you love this kiddo that you want to do everything you can for, it introduces an incredibly different dynamic than a lot of marriages grapple with in the day-to-day. So Kristin, give us some information about how your family came into this space when you first realized that you were going to be in a situation of raising a child who was differently abled, who was going to have significant medical needs. Give us the backstory on that.
Yeah, so the pregnancy with our daughter, Bethany Grace, who is now 14, from the very beginning was not a typical pregnancy. I was very sick, went into preterm labor dozens of times, and was in the hospital for 2 months. And finally, I was about 27 weeks pregnant. The doctors wanted to do a lot of tests just to see what was going on. And 2 days before Christmas, we learned that our sweet Bethany has a severe chromosomal deletion called Cre-Du-Shaw syndrome, or 5p minus. And so on the short arm of the 5th chromosome, she's missing a big chunk of genes. Doctors said she wouldn't survive. They saw on the fetal echocardiogram tetralogy of Fallot, which is a very, very serious heart condition. Then they said she wouldn't survive because of that. She was teeny tiny. She quit growing because of the genetic problem. And she survived. She was born pink. She was in the NICU for 3 months. And we, of course, went through the NICU roller coaster. If anybody has ever been through that with their child, of some traumatic experiences with her, watching her do okay, watching her get really sick. And when she was 3 months old, she came home. Todd and I walked in the door with her. Teeny tiny still. I think she was barely 5 pounds at 3 months old on 3 or 4 machines. And we looked at each other, and our oldest was 3.5 at that time as well. And we just looked at each other and knew our life, our family life and marriage was never going to be the same.
Right, right. It's amazing to me, Kristin, that you realized it that quickly, because sometimes I hear from people that it takes a bit to actually have that sink in. Now, I think the 3-month stint in the NICU, we have a great episode that I'll have Rebecca link to back in the podcast with Kelly, who is the executive director of Hand to Hold, which is a nonprofit that actually comes alongside parents who are walking the NICU journey. But I have heard people, and some of this I think has to do at times with, depending on what your child's diagnosis is, that there's a sense that when you get through the immediate crisis of the diagnosis and then here are the things we need to do, then maybe the expectation is, and then things will get back to normal. But that doesn't sound like that's what happened for y'all. So Todd, when you walked in that door with Kristin and thought, oh, wow, we are in a whole new landscape. From your personality and perspective, what gear did you move into? And when I say what gear, I go into research mode. Like, okay, now I have to become an expert on this and figure all the things out. That's not everybody's mode. What was your mode when you realized we are starting a brand new chapter?
Well, I think it's kind of funny you call it a mode. What we realized 10 years later is it was survival mode. And while we felt we mentally knew that things were going to be different and nothing was going to be the same anymore, like Kristin said, we weren't prepared for the realities of what that really was. As we started that first week, first month of there, setting up all the machines, the breathing machines, the oxygen machines, having our daughter literally next to our bed all night long, taking care of her all night long, things like that, it just got to be overwhelming. And it was truly survival mode. It was do whatever we can to get through this day, both of taking care of her, trying to take care of our other child, trying to financially make it, and just everything associated with the church and work where I was at the time. And it was just little sleep, very just robotic, get through the day type mentality. Nothing else extra could be done. Nothing fun, nothing even communicating with one another, other than just what it took to get through the day.
Right. When did you begin to realize, okay, I mean, somebody's got to get some sleep. We got to figure out some different finances. We have to figure out how to be fair to the other children that are in this household and make sure they're getting attention and what they need as well. With all of that swirling, at what point, Kristin, did y'all look at each other and go, wow, if we're not intentional, this marriage could be the thing that is the thing that pays the ultimate price when it comes to doing everything that needs to be done for this child? When was there an inflection point? Was it a growing realization? What happened?
The stress built and built and built, which put a wedge between us further and further and further. And honestly, it was about 2 years later that we hit the reality of our marriage is in shambles. We did not figure out how to do it together. You talk about that acute moment when we learned the diagnosis, we grieved, which we now know in researching for the book is called acute grief. We did that together. We had each other. What we didn't understand is that parents who have children with disabilities go through a different type of grieving process, which is long-term and it's chronic and it comes in waves. And that was probably the one thing, the stress and then the grief, we were totally disconnected in that process because we didn't know what was going on. And like Todd said, he was a robot. He was just trying to pay the bills, do the practical things. And in the meantime, I'm drowning emotionally. And we're not on the same page with grief.
I don't have time for emotions. I'm going to take care of stuff.
Right. And so it was really 2 years later that we looked at each other and we were like, we didn't even want to be in the same room.
Right. And that had to be a scary moment because the reality is, particularly with the situation that y'all are engaged with your daughter, you know, it's not a one-person job trying to help this child and have the quality of life that you want her to have. And so in a way that's even more intense than a lot of marriages, you desperately need each other. And yet the very situation itself is creating this division. Now, Todd, I know there are some startling statistics surrounding marriages in which there is a child who's differently abled, particularly a child who has really deep medical issues. When you began to realize how much the odds were against you, because you guys can correct me and you'll be the experts on this, but I've seen studies that put the numbers as high as 90% of marriages don't make it with a child who's differently abled in the mix. When you began to realize those statistics and you had this moment of going, wow, we're in shambles, what was the next step you took? Because it's an important moment to recognize and be honest diagnostically about, we are a big hot mess. But then what happens once that moment of realization hits?
Right. You bring up the statistics, and that was something that, you know, we'd heard and things like that. We've recently done a lot of research on looking at those statistics and found that most of those aren't true. They're not based on research and fact. But at the time, it feels like, okay, everybody else is, you know, leaving their marriage or having issues. How can we have hope? So that time, you know, it was kind of a hopeless feeling that you said. We found since in that research that many couples still stay together. The rate is higher, but those that do stay together and work through it really build a more satisfying, fulfilling marriage. And that's what we found as we've worked through it. But back at that moment, like you were saying, it felt a lot hopeless, didn't know what to do, kind of came to a point in my own personal mindset. I kind of looked at it. I'm very a thinking type person. So for me, I had to reason through it in my head. And I came to the realization that every day is the same. Every day is like a war zone at our house in terms of what we have to do. It's treating triage all the time, both physically, emotionally, with our kids, everything. And we can't survive like this. Something has to change. I don't know what. And I have to figure out what. And I'm like to solve problems. So for me, that became kind of the focus is something has to change. What is it? The current status is not working. So I have to give it up. We have to do something different. And so that really brought that to Kristin and kind of talked about it. And that kind of started the process of something new happening in our marriage and our life. And not to spoil it, but it took many years to act on that and to really figure out what to do. But that was really the genesis and the starting point of it all.
Right. So, Kristin, what did y'all begin to implement as part of having had this realization and part of Todd saying, okay, this isn't working, so now we got to start something new? Give the listener who's in this situation, who recognizes, man, that's where my marriage is at. Like, we had this unexpected diagnosis and we are just as far apart as we can be right now, and yet we desperately need to be together and unified on this. Give the listener the first 2 or 3 steps that began to reconnect you, that began to get you into a place of being able to operate not just as a triage team, but as a life team. What did y'all do?
Looking back, we've reflected, and the first thing we realized we did was recommit to our marriage vows, which were very, very different than what we had imagined when we stood at, the altar. It was like through machines and just trying to stay out of the ER, through financial almost ruin, we just looked at our situation, and Todd said to me, I'm not going to leave you. I haven't given up on us. And that was what began to turn everything around, that and recommitting to God, that we don't know how we're going to make it work. Our marriage is just in crisis, but God, please help us. We're recommitting. That was the first step, which seems so basic, but it changed everything. It gave us hope. I knew that despite feeling emotionally unsupported for the past 2 years, I knew that Todd still cared about me and was trying to do what he could to express that. That was the first thing we did. The second thing we did, which felt impossible, was to get out together for at least an hour a week, which can feel impossible for couples. But thankfully, a woman at the church who actually had pediatric, she was a doctor training, offered to come over and learn how to take care of Bethany Grace so we could get out. It was about an hour and a half a week on Wednesday nights. That actually opened the door for us to even have that first conversation because we got out of the house together. So that was critical. And then we began to learn how to manage the stress together and support one another emotionally, which was, we go through it in the book. It was like a 7-year process. So really, from the conversations we started having then till now, it was very rote. Todd, I need you to, I had a hard day at the doctor. It was very devastating. And he just kind of looked at me like, I don't know what to say. And I'm like, this is where you say, that sounds really hard. I'm sorry you went through that. And that has developed over the past, really, more 10 years now, to just really deep, close relationships where I know that Todd cares about me deeply and validates my emotions. But it took learning how to do all this.
Right. In real time, as you're in the midst of having to learn how to do everything for your daughter and all of the different things that pop up that are unexpected. Kristin, I love that you bring up, I get it, that it can sound rote, but the clarity of communication, I mean, we all need that, even if we have kids who are neurotypical or who are not experiencing some of the challenges that you have faced. We all need to be willing to go to that place of saying, I'm going to tell you something, and then I'm going to tell you what I need to hear. Because we don't come with scripts. We don't come built in with some kind of AI database that allows us to know exactly the thing that someone else needs to hear. And I do think it is by identifying and calling it out and saying, here's what I need. That's a really powerful modality, not just for couples in your situation, but for all couples. I think it's amazing. You bring up this challenge of wanting to be able to have and needing to have a little break every week. One of the things that we did through the nonprofit that we had was a program called Tonight to Dream. And a church donated the space, and we had a pediatric nursing group who would come in and provide childcare for families with children who are differently abled, for that child and for their neurotypical children. And it's one of the things that I still today have a real heartbeat for when I hear churches talking about they want to do this kind of missions work and they want to do that kind of missions work and on and on and on. And I go, what do you offer the people in your church family for whom getting out on a date night because they have a child who is cognitively different and needs some extra special care? What are you offering those families? What do your children's programs look like? We've had various interviews on this podcast through the years talking about that deep need with the number of children today who are being identified as differently able, and churches who are scrambling to try to catch up in terms of the ability to serve and walk beside those families. So I'm glad that you brought up how powerful it was to have someone come alongside you in that way. It's probably one of the number one questions I get being a mom of 8 kids. And that question is, what on earth are y'all doing about college? And I can tell you, with 8 different kids, 8 different learning styles, 8 different ideas about what the kids want when it comes to their careers and all of the rest, college has been a big topic of conversation around here. Well, there is a university that I want you to know about because it just hits so many of the things that are really important when it comes to considering your kid's college education. George Fox University, it's the #1 private school in Oregon. It's a Christian university. It's located in the heart of the Pacific Northwest. And what's so great is in addition to a top-notch education, students have the opportunity to grow and deepen their faith. And they can learn in this really pivotal time in their lives who God made them to be. I mean, let's face it. We need more people coming out of our universities who know how to be leaders and how to be leaders with character. And George Fox University offers more than 60 academic majors. And that includes a nationally recognized engineering program, a nursing program. It allows your student to pursue their passions and prepare for the calling that God has for them. And let's not forget about fun when it comes to college. George Fox University students have a great student life. There are weekly campus events, there's chapel, there's service opportunities. There are 23 NCAA Division III athletic teams. Here's something that is important to me. There's a study abroad opportunity. So if your student wants to go and experience life somewhere else for a semester, they can do that. There's outdoor recreation because, of course, we're talking about Oregon, so gorgeous. George Fox University could be just the perfect fit for your student as you are looking into college, career, and all that goes beyond. George Fox University, where your student will learn and thrive in the center of it all. Now, for you, Todd, as you began pursuing a different career, education, doing what you could do to make things more stable financially, we all know that building a new career and the stresses that come with that whole process have their own needs in terms of what you were probably needing from Kristin in terms of support for what you were trying to pursue on behalf of the family. But I could imagine a scenario where, in light of what she was grappling with every day, maybe it felt like, wow, do I even bring this up? Oh, it was a rough day with colleague so-and-so. They were in a bad mood, while she's had a day with your daughter that has been just at the cusp of medical crisis. How did you learn to both be honest with Kristin about what your needs were, but maybe also have to take into consideration the level of stress she was already carrying at home? How did you achieve through the years, as you said, it's been a while, but what balance have you ultimately figured out in that trajectory?
Well, I'll go back a little bit to where kind of we said a minute ago, kind of making this decision together. If I had to kind of mentally have a picture of what it was, it's kind of like opening a door to a new chapter of life that we're walking through holding hands together. And we don't know what's outside that door. We don't know what challenge it'll face, what's there. But we're in it together. And so that's the basis of it. So for me, walking through that door and the challenge, like you say, was an emotional thing of supporting Kristin. I'm not a great emotional support person historically. I'm much better now. But I had to learn a lot of that. And part of it was the base of that commitment. I knew how important that was to her, that she'd told me that was one of the most critical things for her. So I knew I had to make it a priority. And just like any other field or research study or anything else, I had to figure out how to be better at it and to do it better. And like she said, there was a lot of talking me through it. It was a lot of me being willing to say, I don't really know what you need, and I really want to help you. And she felt my genuineness and honesty and would help coach me on some things, like she said, of I just need you to ask how my day was. And so I would learn to, like she said, just ask, how was your day? What can I do? And things like that. And those things made a big difference. And as I started hearing back those things, then I was able to respond and react and learn more things to say, better ways of phrasing things, and how to really be natural. And my true intent was to support her emotionally, and was able to do that better just with practice, like anything else. So yes, there was things at school as I was going through my training and with colleagues and things going on. For me, it was kind of a comparison to what was at home. Those were minor. So it was one of those kind of just leave most of those things there. I'm not going to completely cut those things off from home life too, because she wants to support me. And that'd be unfair for our relationship not to share when something bothered me. But it's kind of picking a level of, okay, what is the level of frustration or stress or anything at work that I need to bring home? And it has to be pretty major for me to bring it through the door, so to speak.
Right. Kristin, I think one of the things that probably feels like it goes right out the door when you're in survival mode, when you are trying to figure out a new way of communicating, when you are grappling with all the challenges that come, would be for intimacy in the marriage to just get really sidelined. I mean, the fatigue, the listening for the monitor, all of the things that would seek to distract and keep you away from being able to connect intimately. How did y'all get through that piece? And how do you advise your readers to be able to move back into a place where that becomes a priority again in the marriage, even with all that's going on around you?
Yeah, so one of the biggest factors that just crushes intimacy in a marriage with a child with high needs is the stress level. And so the stress level that we were under, I could not calm my body's stress response down enough for that to even enter my mind as a possibility. And so parents get into this chronic stress response, and that actually lowers libido in 90% of people, the stress alone. And like you said, exhaustion. You've got people in your home, if you're fortunate to have that kind of support, like nurses in your home or other people who are coming in and out. Like you said, we still have a baby monitor. Beth is 14. We still have a baby monitor because she's in a medical crib on a feeding tube at night. And so, and it can be, the research shows, it can be different for women from men. I think at one point, this is going to sound really harsh, but it's true. Todd said, "You're just going to have to get over it. We can't get out of the house. You're going to have to find a way to make it work." He's so much more empathic, and now he understands what it was like for me. I literally could not separate from the stress of the house, even in our bedroom with the door shut. And so what it took was, one, us getting out of the house together, out of that stress. And there are times we have gone literally to a hotel 10 minutes away for a night, and that has made a world of difference in our relationship, our stress levels, being able to connect in that way. So even if, couples can't get away to anywhere, exotic or far away, just 10 minutes away. If your child has an emergency, you're right there. Sometimes we literally stay like 5 minutes from the children's hospital so we can just run over, and meet whoever, my parents or a nurse there. But getting out of that stress and learning how to de-stress together. We started running and supporting one another and running, which got our stress levels down. Now, couples may not be able to run or do anything like that. But that is one of the most important things to do.
Right.
And then get that quality alone time together, and make it a priority, I think.
I love that you bring up the somatic response of dealing with this level of stress. I think sometimes it feels like to me that we typically look at chronic stress cycles as something that's all purely emotional or mental. And we forget that our bodies literally start just oozing stress hormones, and it impacts everything. When your cortisol is high,
right,
it impacts not just the way your mood hits, it impacts everything. And so I'm so glad that you really saw, hey, I need a physical change of space. I need to physically work on these stress levels, because it all works in tandem in the way that God created us. And yet, I don't know why we do it. We just typically seem to partition off. Well, go mentally deal with your stress. And sometimes a change of location can be a phenomenal switch in your brain to get something to go in a different direction. I love that you bring that up. Now, Todd, we may have listeners, I'm sure we do, who don't have kids with disabilities, who haven't walked this path, who are done with having kids, and it doesn't look like it's something that they need to have on their mind's eye, as a possibility out there. How do you suggest that someone who's listening, who says, I haven't walked the experience that Todd and Kristin have had, but I have a deep compassion and a desire to be of help, and I'm worried I'm going to say the wrong thing, or I'm worried I'm going to offer help that wouldn't be help. How do you advise providing the kind of support that parents who are walking the disability journey with one of their kids, well, what kind of support really is the most helpful?
Well, first I'll say, as a couple having gone through this and talking to many, many other couples, we're very desperate, and we're not willing to share that with many people at all. So we're not going to express our needs. We're not going to tell you what we need. We feel like we have to bear this cross alone, so to speak, and take care of everything in many, many ways. So it's oftentimes hard to know what a couple might need. So really just reach out with anything. Literally anything. Just say, hey, I love you all. I want to do something for you. What can I do? Don't just leave it at what can I do, because most couples will say, oh, we're good, or things like that. But come up with something tangible and real to offer. And whatever it is will be helpful. So for instance, we had a Sunday school class reach out and offer to make meals for us during this time. And at first we were like, no, we can do food and meals and things like that. But they literally got together, and I don't know for how many months they provided meals for us every day for the first couple months, and then periodically after that. That was huge. We wouldn't have asked for that. It was hard to accept it, but it made a difference every single night that we had, one, the expense of the food, but two, just the preparation time so that we could spend it on doing the other things we had to do. Something like that. Or saying, you know what, can I come mow your yard this week? Or can I hire someone to mow your yard? I know your time is short. This is a way I can help and bless you. Please let me. So I think people that aren't in our situation, that are looking on from the outside, often think, like you said, you're going to overstep some bounds. You're going to hit a nerve or something. You're not. Just if you come in and show you care and really do, then that means all the world to us. That your support, your care, the way you reach out, whatever you do is going to be accepted and valued and make a difference in our lives. So make the first step.
I love the way you state that. Make the first step. That's just great. Well, Kristin and Todd, thank you so much for your honesty, your vulnerability about the journey that you've been in. And now, what a gorgeous thing that you're in a season where you're able to take all these really hard lessons that have been learned over this experience. And now God's going to be using that to help equip a new generation of parents some of them facing the same things that you have faced, others who are wanting to be great community and support to someone who's walking through this. How does the listener get in touch with you and find the book and find you on social and all the stuff, Kristin?
So our website is disabilityparenting.com. And we have a blog, lots of articles, lots of free resources you can download. There's a page for our book, How to Build a Thriving Marriage as You Care for Children with Disabilities, which releases May 14th. We are also on Instagram at Disability Parenting. And then the book is available for pre-order right now, pretty much anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Target, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, and at the Baker Books site. And it's actually 40% off right now at Baker Books with free shipping. So now's a great time to pre-order.
Yeah, buy a book for a couple that you know that needs this in this situation. They probably don't know about us and don't have time to listen to podcasts or look at books. So buy one and give it to them as a gift.
Right.
And it's not a book you have to read through cover to cover. It's more like a manual where you can just focus on one skill in the marriage. So yeah, we love to connect with the audience. Send us a message. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, one skill at a time. I just think that's great. Well, thank you again so much for being on the podcast. I really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Julie.
And I love to hear from you too. You can connect with me at Julie Lyles Carr, usually on Instagram. You can also go to julielylescarr.com. And don't forget to check out All Mom Does, allmomdoes.com, All Mom Does on the socials. Would you do me this amazing favor, pretty please? Would you grab the link for this episode and send it to someone you know who would really benefit from hearing about this journey that Todd and Kristin have been on? I know it will be of hope and encouragement. And that's just one of the best ways you can thank us, when you get that out to someone who needs it. A big shout out and thank you to Rebecca, our amazing producer and content coordinator. She puts together show notes every week, and you'll find all the links that Todd and Kristin have been talking about. I'll see you next time on the AllMomDoes Podcast.